This episode is being brought to you by PristineAuction.com. Make sure you go and check out their large inventory of authentic signed items that are being auctioned off daily. If you've listened to the show before, you likely know that I've started collecting signed helmets from each of the 32 NFL teams. Why? Well, because it's a lot more affordable than you'd think. In fact, we're giving away a signed David Johnson jersey from them right now at fantasypros.com/contest. When you go to PristineAuction.com, which is spelled Pristine, auction.com, all we ask is that you let them know that Fantasy Pros sent you. That way, we can keep doing these giveaways. Okay, let's get into the show. What's going on, guys? Welcome back into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Tagliere. That's right, no Bobby today, which means there are going to be no bad food takes. But they didn't leave me going solo because they knew I'd talk for like 45 minutes on how impressive, Joe Mixon, Saquon Barkley, Baker Mayfield looked last night. So instead, we brought in Greg Smith from TwoQBs.com. Greg, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Mike, it's great to be back on. It's preseason's here. We have a ton to get to. I'm super excited to talk ball with you.
I am excited as well. It's funny because Greg, it's kind of like deja vu for me and Greg, because last night we recorded at this exact same time for his podcast. And he asked me a very an interesting question at the end of it. He goes, say something nice about your co-host, Bobby Sylvester. What did Bobby say about me? I got to know.
It's in one ear out the other. I record so many of these things. It was good stuff. He did not say anything negative, but you know what? If you want to find out, you and your listeners are just going to have to tune in to the 2QB Experience podcast, 2-a-day series, and check it out.
Yeah, it was really fun because they invited both me and Bobby on. He recorded us separately, so I want to know what Bobby said about me, so I'll be tuning in. I suggest you guys do the same. Obviously, Greg, you hit it on the head right there. It's really good to see football back on our TVs, though there was some downside as we received some bad news earlier today.
Oh, yeah.
Now, before we get into that, I want to remind you guys that we are giving away a chance to play in a fantasy league against Bobby and me in our listener league that is being hosted on Sleeper. They have a great mobile app which will allow us to destroy all of you. Seriously, sign up now. What are you waiting for? All you have to do is go to fantasypros.com/listener league to be entered. Also, if you haven't heard, we are giving away a signed Le'Veon Bell jersey and a free Hall of Fame upgrade for Fantasy Pros. It's free to enter. I'm blown away that more of you have not gotten in on this one yet, but enter the giveaway at fantasypros.com/giveaway. So on today's show, Greg and I are going to be talking about some of the action that took place last night, discussing 2QB strategy, because that's what Greg does, as well as some of the quarterbacks that Greg is higher or lower on than the expert consensus rankings. And at the end, we'll close it out with some listener mailbag questions. Greg, the big news that dropped earlier today was that Washington rookie Derrius Guice, his 2018 season is over after tearing his ACL during the team's first preseason game. What does this mean for, let's say Chris Thompson, what does it mean for him? And what player do you see taking over as the early down workhorse there? Is it going to be Samaje Perine? Is it going to be Rob Kelly, who reportedly has lost some weight? He looks better in training camp. What's your take on the whole situation here?
Yeah, this is a major bummer. There was a lot of really positive buzz around Guice, and despite, his fall in the draft, I think we were all really excited to see what he could do in the NFL. And I mean, for Chris Thompson, this is obviously a good thing. I don't necessarily know if any of the other, more plotting running backs behind him on the depth chart for those early downs are really going to be all that desirable. I mean, if somebody's getting carries, we want to be invested in that player to some extent, or at least interested to find out what they're going to do. But I'm not really excited about any of these guys. I think the backup to own here is Alex Smith. I think this just means they're going to pass more. And that is just a really good thing for Chris Thompson, for the receivers on that team, for Smith's rushing production. If I had to pick one of those other running backs to go after, I think it is Rob Kelly. The reports around Perine are not very positive right now, but I'll admit this is so fresh, and I really haven't, aside from just today kind of tangentially thinking about who I would want to own there. I've come to the conclusion that I don't really want anybody except for Thompson and then the passing game in Washington. Where are you at on this?
Well, it's really tough, and a lot of people have asked me that question today, and I said that I don't really want to answer it just yet because I think that they want Samaje Perine to win the job, because when you go back and you think about it, it's like they had Rob Kelly on the roster when they drafted Perine, so they obviously felt the necessary to upgrade the position, right? And after seeing Perine last year, I don't know if they feel that way, but I think that they want him to win the job. I think they want to say that they were right in terms of going with him over Rob Kelly, but as of right now, it seems like Kelly's the favorite, but Perine has a shot to win the job. I'm worried about the entire backfield, and I think you hit it on the head when you said Alex Smith, because Chris Thompson, all the news on him is that he's telling people, like, this came out of his mouth, he doesn't know if doctors tell him he's not going to be 100% until November. So he's planning to play. He's participating in practices and things like that, but he might not be the same player. And the psychological portion of it has reportedly messed with him quite a bit, where he's just worried about making a cut, worried about a player landing on it. And that's one of the biggest things in overcoming an injury, the one that he suffered, a broken leg, is getting over that psychological portion. So it's really tough. I mean, here's my question for you though, Greg. And this is where I think a lot of people are going to be listening and thinking the same thing. And that's why I love coming up with these questions. Who would you take in a draft right now? Let's pretend that Rob Kelly wins the Washington starting job, okay?
All right.
Who would you draft, Isaiah Crowell or Rob Kelly?
Crowell. I mean, not close. I just think he's a better player.
Now, the thing is, I think that they're in the same range of players. I actually probably would side with you that Isaiah Crowell might be a little bit better. But Washington, their offensive line has gotten healthy. Like last year, they were really banged up. They've gotten healthy. They have some young players on that offensive line. It's going to be a higher scoring offense, whereas you go to the Jets, you're talking about another 2-down Mack. Really, I mean, I don't think Isaiah Crowell has great hands. I think that Bilal Powell should be the 3rd down back, and then when Elijah McGuire comes back, he's going to be mixed in as well. So I would lean Bilal Powell over everyone here, and I'm probably alone in that, to be honest with you. I don't think anybody in the industry agrees with me that Bilal Powell should be drafted over Isaiah Crowell.
I think on a talent level, you might be right about Powell over Crowell, but that's just not the way that the Jets appear to want to use those players. I mean, even in the preseason game tonight that the Jets are playing, I think Crowell already has a touchdown reception from Teddy Bridgewater. Like, they're going to try to use him out of the backfield. They might not use him as often as we would like to see. But I think that just based upon the fact that they brought him in, the fact that they were hyping up Elijah McGuire before he got hurt means that they're kind of out on Bilal Powell. You got to read the tea leaves here. Like, I'm not super excited about anyone in a Jets backfield just because I don't know how good that team is going to be at the surface, like at a base level. So again, we're kind of picking nits over players or at least players I'm not super excited about.
Right.
But yeah, I would definitely prefer Crowell to Rob Kelly or whoever's, the starting running back for Washington going forward.
Well, yeah, it's crazy that you even mentioned that because I actually was paying attention to this. Bilal Powell started for the Jets actually tonight. Now, Isaiah Crowell did score that touchdown, but it was Powell on the field as the starter. So I don't know if this is just like they're going to alternate it next week. I don't know. But then on top of that, Isaiah Crowell had to go to the locker room reportedly with a head injury. That tells me he suffered a concussion, which means he's probably going to be out a couple weeks. It's a new offense. Again, I'm not in on Isaiah Crowell. I've never been. I understand why people want to chase volume, but I think it's very bad volume. So, some more bad news, though. It's slightly, I think it's a less impact on fantasy, is that the Colts had 2 players suffer injuries in their game last night. First, it was Marlon Mack, who tweaked his hamstring. He's going to miss multiple weeks, but they're saying that he should be back for the start of the season. And then later it was announced that rookie wide receiver Deion Kane suffered a torn ACL. He was someone that was moving his way up the depth chart, once he was drafted. And I think some people said he was going to compete for Ryan Grant for that number 2 wide receiver job. I don't think that was ever going to happen. But Greg, what does this do to someone like Marlon Mack on your draft board? Because he was falling into that RB 30 to 35 range. And I started to like him in that range because it's like you're at the tail end of starting running backs. And even though he's in a timeshare, it reminded me kind of like a Jay Ajayi thing where it's like, he's going to be the leader of the timeshare in a Doug Peterson type offense, but you're not paying RB 18 price that you do with Jay Ajayi. You're getting him as like the RB 32, and I was happy. But what does this do for you for Marlon Mack's value?
Yeah, I don't think it. I mean, honestly, he was undervalued before, and now if he kind of stays in the same range, he'll probably be properly valued. I mean, we have to assume that he's going to come back from this injury at some point. Lower body injuries with running backs are always a little worrisome. Wide receivers, too. Like anybody who relies on speed, like Marlon Mack, you don't necessarily want to see those guys getting hamstring injuries, even if it is this early in the preseason. I think that you can still kind of draft him in that range. But with that said, I'm also the type of drafter who tends to lock up my running backs earlier in drafts in the first place. So Mack wasn't a guy I was ending up with a ton at all in that way, so I was kind of not avoiding him on purpose, but just avoiding him for circumstantial reasons. Like that was usually the range where I'm looking at wide receivers and tight ends and things like that. So this doesn't do a whole lot for me in terms of max value. Like I think he can probably stay put in most rankings until we find out more about his injury. The injury to Kane is a bummer too, man. Like that's a guy who I was a little excited about. I was buying the hype a little bit that maybe he could push Ryan Grant. I agree with you. I think that he was more of a bet for like the wide receiver 3 role than the wide receiver 2 role. But with Andrew Luck as the quarterback, that's a role I'm okay with. Like I want that player, especially at a very, very cheap cost. Like I drafted Deion Kane in a dynasty league earlier this year. I've been taking him at the end of some best ball drafts. Like that's a drag too. Where are you at on the other Colts running backs here? Wilkins and Naheem Hines. I guess maybe Robert Turbin after his suspension. Like, are you targeting any of those guys more aggressively now with this news to Mack?
Yeah, Hines is an interesting one. He reminds me of someone that's going to be used like in like a Gio Bernard type role, or you could even say Darren Sproles, considering the offense that he's playing in. So I think he's going to have some value in PPR leagues. I don't think that he's someone they're going to want to give 12 to 15 touches a game to. I don't think he's like a McCaffrey because they obviously only used it was a 4th round pick on him. As for Wilkins, yeah, but that's the thing is as for Wilkins. I'm liking it. I mean, everything I hear out of Colts camp is like they don't know how he's doing so well because he's not a crazy athlete. But if you watch him, he just does it well. He just continues to do things. And that's kind of what I saw on tape with him is he's just I don't want to say boring because he's just he doesn't flash or anything like that, but he was solid. He's a 3-down back. He's big enough to handle a big workload. And if Marlon Mack, if this soft tissue injury, those things can linger. And obviously Marlon Mack last year, he played through that shoulder injury that required surgery at the end of the year. It just seems like Marlon Mack might not be best suited for a role that's going to see 15 touches a game. So Jordan Wilkins has a chance early in the season to make a name for himself. And honestly, with this offensive line built the way that it is, the way that they've attacked it, I like it. I mean, Jordan Wilkins, if anything, you might be right in the fact that Mack, you don't want to move him down too much because he was already in this gray area. But Wilkins, if anything, I think this moves him up my board. And if you want to draft someone like, let's say, Mark Ingram, you grab someone like Jordan Wilkins later because he might have a role over the first 4 weeks with Robert Turbin on the shelf being suspended. So that's where I'm at in that situation. I should also mention that George Kittle suffered a shoulder injury that's going to force him to miss a few weeks, though. Again, he's another player. They're expecting him to be ready for week 1. I think this is just another reason to stream the tight end position if you're waiting. I mean, Greg, were you in any league, were you drafting George Kittle thinking that he was going to be an every week starter?
Yes.
Oh, wow. So hold on. So this is interesting. I want to talk about this for a minute because I've been on board saying that, Kittle last year shared a lot of time and like he saw under 4 targets per game. And then you add Pierre Garçon coming back. You have Marquise Goodwin, who all reports are saying that he's going to take a step forward in his career. Dante Pettis turning heads. They brought in Jerick McKinnon, who operates in a similar area of the field. And that's probably the best part of Jerick McKinnon's game. Let's be honest. What do you see in George Kittle and why would you attack him in drafts?
So typically with the tight end position, all I'm really looking for is touchdown upside because week to week, not many of them are going to see that sort of target volume that you really want, from the position like you're going to get with Kelsey or Gronk or Zach Ertz. And so with Kittle, I see a guy who, like you said, is probably competing for targets with a lot of different guys. But in the red zone, he seems like one of their best options. And that's the reason I was really going after him, is I see a touchdown score in George Kittle. Does that make sense?
Oh, no. And it's funny because that was because I always try and look at both sides of the argument, right? My negatives just overweighed the one positive. The one positive is that they don't have any wide receiver on that team that's over 6 foot.
Right.
So that's a huge deal, right? This injury obviously lowers him a little bit. We're going to talk about another tight end here in a second. But Greg, I'll ask you, did you have any big takeaways from the preseason games last night? Is there any players that you were really impressed by, or maybe some players that you were let down by, shocked that they played as long as they did? What were some of your highlights from last night's takes?
The only game I really watched in depth was the Niners-Cowboys one, and there weren't a whole lot of takeaways from that aside from the injuries there to Kittle and to Matt Breida. We had a little Matt Breida scare. It sounds like he's going to be okay, which is nice because he's another guy I'm interested in that kind of cheap Marlon Mack range of running backs. And I think Breida was going well beyond Mack and ADP as well. I think some of the other tight end plays here are very appealing. The first, of course, is David Njoku with 2 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we need to remember that Josh Gordon didn't play in that game. But on the other hand, Tyrod Taylor made a living for Charles Clay in Buffalo. And, if that's the type of player he's going to continue to be, he could develop that similar sort of chemistry with David Njoku, and I like that. And the other tight end I'm interested in based upon last night's action is one of my deeper sleepers, and that's Nick Vannett, the tight end for the Seattle Seahawks. I've been drafting Vannett like in the last round of every best ball draft because I'm a routine like tight end punter, so I always take 3, and usually my third guy was going to be Nick Vannett in one of those final 2 rounds. So those are probably my 2 big takeaways. I mean, we could talk about more, like the Josh Allen debate is raging on, but let's get to that later. What do you think about these tight ends?
I love what you said there. Nick Vannett is a name that I brought up early in the Dynasty offseason. I said, if you can grab this guy, he's sitting on your waiver wire, go snag him right now. And it's something that he could turn into something. They drafted him in the 3rd round just a couple of years ago. He's had some rapport with Russell Wilson. It's not a very large sample size, but I'm not excited when you talk about bringing in Ed Dickson, a career backup who's over 30 years old. So I think Nick Vannett, I think that's an awesome take. I haven't mentioned his name in a long time, so I like that. In regards to David Njoku, it's funny because we had a heated discussion on this show just, I think it was last week with Chris Harris on the show. And, Bobby and I both stated that David Njoku was really talented, and I actually loved him coming out of college. Like, he could be a dominant force in the NFL. And I love him in Dynasty. I think I have him ranked as the number 6 Dynasty tight end. I love David Njoku. However, I was not drafting him as a top 12 tight end this year because, when you looked around the target landscape, it was not good, But now things are changing, right? Corey Coleman was just shipped off to the Bills for nothing. Josh Gordon still hasn't reported to the team. Antonio Callaway got caught with pot in his car. We don't, the Browns apparently believe that it wasn't his. He's saying it was a friend's. Whatever the case is, all of a sudden, David Njoku doesn't have nearly as much competition for targets. And by the way, Nick Chubb didn't look very good last night. I mean, I'm not giving up on Nick Chubb because he had one bad preseason game, but he looked very sluggish. Like, he just looked like a snail trying to run through that offensive line. It just didn't look very good. But David Njoku, again, the talent's there. I've always believed in the talent. It's just always, when it comes to tight ends, I want opportunities. And honestly, I'm going to move him up my board based on opportunity. And when they traded Corey Coleman, I moved him up a little bit. And the longer that Josh Gordon fails to return to the team, I'm going to move him up a little bit again. But again, if Josh Gordon comes back, if Jarvis Landry is going to see the 100-plus targets that he's going to get, if Duke Johnson's still operating over the middle of the field, if Antonio Callaway doesn't get suspended, that's when I'm going to start sliding him down again.
And that's the argument for Vannett, right? Is who are the other, not just red zone threats on that team, like we talked about with Kittle. Who are the other receiving threats on that team? Amara Darboh, Brandon Marshall, who's
Jaron Brown. At this point.
Yeah, Jaron Brown. Like, I like Jaron Brown too, but like, the point is that it's completely unknown there.
Yep.
And if you're looking for touchdown upside, Vannett, like Kittle, like David Njoku, is a big body who has a little bit of a rapport with Russell Wilson, which is something that Ed Dickson does not have. Like, there's a lot to like there just on a speculative basis, and that's all you're looking for with these late round picks.
Absolutely. Yes. And like the whole Nick Vannett thing, like you have so many, those touchdowns vacated. People are talking about Brandon Marshall. I think Brandon Marshall's not going to make the team. Like, I legitimately think he's done. Like, Brandon Marshall, he was so good for so long, but he's done. And I'm with you. Jaron Brown, while I like him, he's not a big red zone guy. Nick Vannett's a very good athlete. People have talked about Will Dissly, that they drafted him. He's not he's a blocker, guys. He's like legitimately a blocking tight end. That's all he is. And again, Ed Dickson doesn't scare me. He's actually been out, not even practicing right now. So I think Nick Vannett is a very good sleeper. I think you're going to be able to use him as streamer sometimes, and he might just turn into, that next tight end that people are talking about. I know one thing, Greg, that you're really happy about is seeing Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck on the field, throwing footballs, taking a hit. He liked He liked the hit. He came out after the game and said, I liked it. I took a hit. I got up and I said, all right, I'm back. He said it was good to feel that. Andrew Luck looked really good. He looked good in his return. There's literally no bad takeaways I can take. The fact that they kept him on the field, I think he threw 8 or 9 passes. I'm happy, man. And I know you're happy because let's just jump into that right now. Some of the quarterbacks that you're higher or lower on, according to our consensus, Andrew Luck leads the charge here, right? You have him as your number 6 quarterback. You've been a believer since before even last night happened. So tell us why you like Andrew Luck in 2018.
Yeah, Luck's been my QB6 since I first published rankings this year, like back in March or something like that. And frankly, now I worry that maybe I should even have him higher. Like, we're talking about an elite talent here. Since 2014, he's posted better marks in points per game, top 10 finish rate, top 20 finish rate, and average weekly finish than Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson, Tom Brady, Cam Newton, and every other quarterback with a significant sample size. He's had a full season to get healthy. He looked healthy in camp, and now he looks healthy in the first preseason game. At some point, we have to stop worrying about his health, and we have to start drafting him like that elite guy that he is. And I'm already there. I've been there. Like, we're cruising USA here. We're hitting all the checkpoints, man. Like, I'm ready for Luck season. Let's do it.
I love it, man. Is there any part of you that, and I'm going to speak for everybody here, is there any part of you that worries about the weapons that they have for him? I mean, T.Y. Hilton is a field stretcher. We know that he's got rapport with Andrew Luck, but I mean, do we think that Ryan Grant can take a step forward in his career and be a full-time starter? Because he's never really been that. I know he earned that last year in Washington as the year went on, and I'm a big fan of taking Ryan Grant late in best ball leagues because I think he's going to give you some big weeks. But, Chester Rogers now is the wide receiver 3 with Deion Kane out for the year. I mean, Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron, we don't know who's going to emerge there. What do you think about the weapons there? Do they concern you at all?
I mean, they do concern me. They're not great, but they're not the worst. Like, T.Y. Hilton does a lot to kind of take attention away from these other pieces. And, with Frank Reich coming in there, I expect them to deploy kind of like an all hands on deck offensive approach. Like, you're right. Like, Ryan Grant is not going to blow up every week, but he'll blow up often enough. Jack Doyle will blow up sometimes. Eric Ebron will catch a few touchdowns. Like, they're going to spread it around, or that's what I expect them to do. That's what they should do, in my opinion. And I think that we can get in trouble with that, assumption of rational coaching, but Luck is like that good of a player where he can elevate these guys that aren't like elite talents, but are like decent enough. They're NFL caliber players, right? And I'm believing in Luck, the quarterback, ahead of his weapons to some extent. And there is some like sneaky talent there, like Nyheim Hines. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Like, he's a burner, man. That guy is super fast. Like, if you can get him in space, kind of like the Bears did with Tariq Cohen, like in a limited capacity last year, like maybe he flashes. I was excited about Kane. That definitely kind of is, like I said, that's a bummer for me. Like, I was expecting him to do some stuff in this offense, but I don't know. Like, I'm a little worried, and that's probably why I won't move Luck past QB6 in my rankings. But I'm still optimistic. Like, I think that this offense can work, and I think that they're going to find a way to make it work.
Yeah, no, for sure. And so I want to piggyback on that because we're talking about, the lack of weapons there with Indy, but you like Luck, obviously the quarterback, the talent. I think it helps that the defense is not expected to be very good. There should be some shootout potential there. Let's go to the flip side. One quarterback that you're lower on than everybody else, and it's quite a bit lower, is actually Kirk Cousins. And, when we talk about surrounding talent, I mean, his wide receivers, tight end, running back combo. I mean, I don't know if you get much better in terms of supporting cast. I know the offensive line is not great, and they just lost a starting offensive lineman just yesterday, I believe it was. Why don't you like Cousins as much as everyone else?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on some of the checkpoints there. I mean, I think he's a good quarterback. He's my QB 12. I just think the quarterback position is very deep, and it's kind of hard to differentiate between some of these guys. Like, somebody has to fall, at QB 10 and 11, and for me, it's just a couple of different players, But anyway, like, Cousins is a good quarterback. Is he a great one? I'm not sure. Like, same average weekly finish as Blake Bortles over the past 3 years, and admittedly, Bortles has been, like, statistically good over that stretch, so maybe that's not necessarily a ding, but I don't know. Like, Cousins to me feels like a guy who tends to perform well when his situation is good. And you're right. The weapons in Minnesota are a definite upgrade from what he had in Washington. But the offensive line, like you said, is probably going to be worse. The Vikings just lost Nick Easton, likely out for the year after hernia surgery. Pat Elflein is currently on the PUP. Mike Remmers already has an ankle injury. And I think if the Vikings defense kind of plays to the same level that they did last year, Cousins' passing volume could decrease. And a sneaky thing with Cousins is I don't expect the same rushing production that we've come to expect from him now that he's on a team with a real running game. Like, I could see close to 1 to 3 TDs from Cousins on the ground, but not the 4 to 5 that he's scored over the past 3 seasons. Like, in the end, like, he's kind of in that same tier as like my QB 9 and maybe even like my QB 8. To me, he's a little bit below the guys like Roethlisberger, Stafford, and Matt Ryan and Carson Wentz. Like, I think he's on par with all those guys. And if you want to take Cousins first out of that group, by all means, like, I have no issue with that. But for me, he's QB 12 just because, I have to rank him in some order, and he's the guy I like the least of that tier.
Yeah, for sure. And I think some people have underestimated the effect that Jay Gruden might have had on him. I think Jay Gruden is actually a better coordinator, like in terms of what he can do with an offense than people give him credit for. I mean, I think we saw the Robert Griffin III really struggle when he left Jay Gruden. I understand that he had to become a different player, but Kirk Cousins, I mean, we've never seen him play away from that system, right? And by the way, guys, just because you look at Kirk Cousins, like his overall numbers, which are really impressive, like his yards per attempt, his completion percentage, all those are up there, like in terms of his air yards, all that stuff is impressive. But when you actually look at it on a week-to-week basis, Kirk Cousins has actually been a really bumpy quarterback. Like he has not been a stable quarterback at all. Some people have asked me on Twitter recently, like, you guys talk about how many performances they had and where can I find that? That's the series I just released this past week, boom, bust, and everything in between. If you're on Twitter, go there at Mike Tagliere NFL, and I have my pinned tweet. It's my top one. It'll lead you to that series. Kirk Cousins has busted, and what I consider a bust is 13.9 or less fantasy points for a quarterback. That's pretty low. Like that's like it could lose you a week type low. He has busted 18 of 48 games over the past 3 years. That's a really high percentage, guys. He's only been a QB1 46% of the time. So again, he's more of a streamer than anything. Well, what he was in Washington. Now we have more questions. Now that he's going to Minnesota, the defense is really good. His attempts per game are going to come down. That's going to happen. His efficiency is going to be tough to improve because again, when you look at the overall numbers, they were like historically good. So I just think you're going to get a little more consistent performances out of Cousins this year. You just might not get the crazy upside that you would in some of the games that he had while with Washington. So let's talk about another quarterback that you don't like. And I'm sure Bobby wishes he was here for this episode because Bobby's on board with this. He'd be saying, yes, that Jared Goff you have as your number 20 quarterback. Now, he's all over the board. Some people have as a top 10 quarterback going into this year, now that they added Brandon Cooks. Some people, like yourself, have him down at QB 20. Let's talk about Jared Goff.
Yeah, I just don't want to pay for last year's stats. And that kind of applies to all players, not just Jared Goff. But he's a really good poster boy for this. And before I say some more bad things about Goff, I'm going to make the same sort of giant QB tier argument that I made, for Kirk Cousins. Like, there isn't a whole lot of difference between QB 9 and QB 24. Like, these guys are all pretty close in value. Like, we have to like some guys more, and that'll be reflected in our rankings. But just because I have Jared Goff 20 doesn't mean I don't think he could finish as like the QB 12 or the QB 14. That's within his range of outcomes. I just don't expect it. And the reason for that is, like, you look at last year's stats, like overall, like the numbers look pretty good, but he did a lot of damage against bad teams last year. And this year he's going to face a first place schedule. He was under 235 yards in 7 separate games last year. Factor in touchdown regression down from his 2017 rate of 5.9%. And I think he's just kind of going to be a replacement level QB in fantasy. Like, he's going to be like Alex Smith was, like Alex Smith was before 2017, I should say. But like, that's the type of player he seems to me. And I like Sean McVay. I like what they've done with that offense. I think that the league is going to catch up to that a little bit. Like, I think that now that we're starting to see those sorts of, concepts in the passing game a little more widespread, like, defenses are going to be a little bit better prepared, and I think Goff is going to suffer for that. But mostly this is just me fading, the hyper efficient year, and especially in the touchdown department that Goff had last season.
Yeah, no, I'm with you on that one. I like you mentioned the touchdown percentage of 5.9. There were a lot of quarterbacks who kind of broke the mold last year because I don't think people realize just what real touchdown rates are. Like Tom Brady over his career, I was looking at this earlier today, 5.5%. I mean, do you think that Jared Goff is going to beat Tom Brady's, his touchdown rate for his career? I don't. So Todd Gurley is still there. He's still going to get a lot of carries. So for the people that are telling me that Jared Goff is going to pass the ball more in 2018, I could see that. But he's going to lose some of that efficiency. We've already established that. But how many more attempts can he really have? Again, they have Todd Gurley on the roster. They've built that defense into what could be a top 3 defense in 2018. And again, they're not going to throw the ball if they're up by 2 touchdowns. There's just no reason to. I think that you made a great point. I think Jared Goff can be like a Matt Ryan type player in fantasy football, where it's like he's going to always flirt on that QB1 territory, like high-end QB2, but he's never really going to be a sexy player to draft. That's kind of how I feel about Jared Goff. He's not going to give you very much rushing. I think he ran for 40, 50 yards last year, so it wasn't great. So I'm kind of with you on this one. I think I have Goff at 18, so I'm pretty low on him as well. I think you're right when you say, and I think once you get outside the first couple quarterbacks, like honest to God, I say that if you don't get Aaron Rodgers or Russell Wilson, I feel like everybody just kind of blends together, because I don't want to spend a top 50 pick on Tom Brady and then decide I can only play him half the time. I don't want that to happen. And by the way, if you're going to sit here and laugh, oh, Tom Brady only half the time. Last year, he was only a QB1 half the time, like legitimately 50% of his games. So don't laugh that off. I'm with you in the fact that quarterbacks start to blend together. Before we move on to the next thing, I wanted to ask you about one last guy, and it's Jameis Winston. You have him at number 18. Okay, now I had Jameis Winston as I think my QB 10 before the whole suspension came down.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this. Now, I know we talked about this on your show, but I want to clear this up. We do our rankings, and I know you do your rankings based on how you would draft the players. It has nothing to do with projections, because if you take away 3 games, he's naturally going to come down. It's hard for a quarterback to miss 3 games and then still finish as a top 15 option. But let's talk about Jameis Winston and your process as to why you have him at number 18.
Yeah, I had him pretty high as well. I think he was up in like the 13 to 14 range for me before the suspension. And you're right. Like we talked about this on my show. I'm ranking for how I would draft him, not based on projections. Like I don't really care that he's missing the first 3 games of the season when I draft him in a seasonal league, because the first 3 weeks of the season are the easiest time to replace a player. There are no bye weeks or anything like that. And with Winston, we know the ceiling is there. If you take away his games that were impacted by injury last season, he would have ranked 6th in points per game through week 16. And if you want to include week 17, he would have ranked 5th in points per game. I'm excited and actually ending up with Winston a lot. Like I think even at 18, like I'm higher on him than other people. I don't know if the consensus rankings bear that out. I haven't checked, but at this point, like he's down a little bit lower for me because I just like a lot of quarterbacks. That's really what it comes down to. I think a lot of these guys are close in value. So if it comes down to like Winston versus Mariota, Winston versus Garoppolo, Winston versus Phillip Rivers or Dak Prescott or Patrick Mahomes, like I'm going to lead towards the guys who are going to play full seasons, because that does matter to me to some extent. But am I going to take Jared Goff over Jameis Winston? No, I'm not, because I think Winston is like the better ceiling play, and I can deal with those 3 games that he's going to miss the suspension, in a different way, and still draft Winston ahead of Goff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it definitely does. And my advice on Winston has been, he's not drafted in a lot of leagues. The expert consensus on him right now is the 26th quarterback, and people look at
That's
that
too low. That's too low.
I agree. I do, however, I don't think that he needs to be drafted. And the reason I say that, because the first few weeks of the fantasy season are the most important for the waiver wire. You legitimately this is when we actually learn what the depth charts say. Like it tells us this is who's where on the depth chart. This is who's playing snaps.
Great point.
We have to adjust to that, and we're going to have to drop some of those bottom players that we drafted, and that's fine. But my advice on Jameis Winston, after week 2, go to your waiver wire, snag Jameis Winston, because people are going to run to the waiver wire to get him when he starts week 4. So be a week early on him, have the flexibility and understand that if someone grabs him before you, they obviously wanted him more than that. If you have deep rosters, that stuff matters. But again, if you have 6 bench spots like most leagues do, it's just too tough at the start of the year to kind of live through that.
Yeah, the 2 quarterback bias is bleeding through here. That's definitely like a bit of a blind spot for me. Like I think that all these guys should be drafted, because the leagues that I'm drafting, they typically are. And that's where some of this is coming from when I talk about Winston. But you're right. You do not have to draft him. Still, I mean, the upside is there. If your bench is deep, I say go for it.
Absolutely. All right, guys, I want to share something amazing with you. We have partnered with NFL Game Pass. What does that mean? It means that you get every out-of-market preseason game live. Top rookies, comeback players, new players on new teams. It all happens in the preseason live with NFL Game Pass. Me personally, I am most excited to watch Michael Gallup throughout the preseason. I want to see if he can work his way into the starting lineup. He caught a touchdown last night. We will see. With NFL Game Pass, I can watch every single play. And if I miss his game, I can replay it after it's aired. Whoever you want to watch this preseason, you'll need NFL Game Pass so if you're out of market and you can't see it. Best of all, you can kick off the 2018 NFL season with a 7-day free trial of NFL Game Pass. All you have to do is sign up now. NFL.com/fantasy pros. Game on. Seriously, guys, this is how I watch game film. People ask me all the time, Mike, how are you watching all these games? NFL Game Pass. NFL.com/fantasy pros. We got you hooked up. You could have a week to see exactly what you get. All right, Greg, we have a lot of listeners who are taking their shot in 2 quarterback leagues this year. You are the 2 quarterback guru. All right, so let's talk about some advice that you'd give them. Should they draft a quarterback in the first round or two? What is the best piece of advice for some noobs to the format that really just don't know how to approach it?
So you do not need to draft one in the first 2 rounds. You can. You definitely can, especially if you're getting, Aaron Rodgers, if you're getting Russell Wilson. Like for me, that elite tier does extend a few players deeper. Like I'm still drafting Brady as a relatively highly pick in a 2-quarterback format. I think Drew Brees and Cam Newton are both in that discussion as well. So I think you can target that type of player, those QBs that tend to produce more elite weeks than the rest of the guys, lower in our rankings. But with that said, you don't have to get those guys to win because, the problem with drafting them in the early rounds is that you are foregoing the chance to draft elite running backs and elite wide receivers. Like there's elite talent at each position and you have to figure out how you want to put it together, right? If you take an elite quarterback early, that means you're skimping on some other position and vice versa. If you take an elite running back early, you're accepting that you're not going to get Aaron Rodgers, right? That's just how it works. So generally, like my primary piece of advice is in any 2-quarterback format, whether it's 10-team or 12-team, like a super flex league, you want to try to get 3, and you want to get those 3 from like the top 24 to 25 or 26 guys. Because after, QB 25 or 26, you start to get into the really question mark ridden players, the guys who are in timeshares potentially, like with rookies who are incoming, like Tyrod Taylor, Baker Mayfield comes to mind, or like even the Jets situation with Bridgewater and Sam Darnold. Or even Joe Flacco and Lamar Jackson, like those sorts of situations you want to avoid because quarterbacks aren't going to be easy to get off the waiver wire like they are in a 1QB league. So with that in mind, you want to make sure that the starters you get are safe in their jobs. And that's why I try to target getting 3 in some way before like QB 25. And I've done some research on this in terms of like startable weeks, like top 10 percentage, top 20 percentage. And it shows that like basically until QB 25, it's pretty stable. You're going to get pretty steady production. And that makes sense. Like quarterbacks touch the ball a lot. They get a lot of opportunity and they score better than most other positions on a consistent basis. So even if you get a guy like Andy Dalton or Alex Smith or even Blake Bortles or Eli Manning, even Ryan Tannehill, who I think is safe in his job, like these guys are going to be throwing every game to some extent. And that production is going to translate to fantasy points. It may not be as much as Aaron Rodgers, but it's enough to keep you afloat while you try to press some other sort of advantage at running back and at wide receiver. So yeah, try to get 3 in the top 25 of the quarterback position. And if you do that, you'll probably be okay. And in season, you do have to watch the waiver wire. If one of your guys gets hurt, if one of your opponent's quarterbacks gets hurt, you need to be looking at those guys the same way you would a handcuff running back. That stuff happens in 2-quarterback leagues. So there's more to it than just the draft, but that's what I'll say for now.
No, that's great advice. Now, here's one other question I want to follow up to that. Do you change your rankings based on 2-quarterback leagues? Does it change who you want to target?
A little bit. And maybe not, my base rankings that like before a draft starts. But with that said, if I draft a certain type of player, like if I draft a more volatile guy, Ben Roethlisberger comes to mind, Cam Newton comes to mind, somebody who has more kind of up and down weeks. I think you mentioned that with Cousins as well. If you end up with that sort of player, for my QB2, I might be more inclined to go with like a really steady, stable producer like an Alex Smith or a Phillip Rivers, a guy who's not going to hit, a super high ceiling all the time, but is more likely to give me that steady, 14 to 18 fantasy points week in and week out. So on top of like looking at buys to make sure that they don't overlap, like I don't look at that too much, but I do look at it. Another thing I'm looking for is like those different quarterback archetypes, like the guys who I think are, again, more consistent week to week versus the guys who are more up and down. And I think you can mix and match those guys to really good effect, kind of like you would in a best ball league.
Yeah, no, I think that the reason I asked that question is because I always approach it just a little bit different. Like I will change my rankings because in 2-quarterback leagues, you can't afford to lose a quarterback. So while I think that Tyrod Taylor laughing someone off for drafting Tyrod in a redraft league, I wouldn't do that. But in a 2-quarterback league, it's a really risky move where It's like, if you're drafting in a 2-quarterback league, you want at least 2 quarterbacks who have a job for the entire season, barring injury, of course. So that's what I mean by that. It's like, so Andy Dalton, Eli Manning, like I don't even want to say Eli Manning anymore, but Andy Dalton would be someone I'd move up my rankings a little bit just because I know that he is going to have a job for the entire season. He's relatively durable. He's played for most of the season. So I'll tweak them based on that, but just don't take too much risk at the position, I think is ultimately what I was trying to say here. Now, Let's move on to some listener mailbag questions, and it's going to tie into a strategy that I have in mind. So I'm just going to go and say, Jay asks us, will Tyrod Taylor be a top 10 fantasy quarterback with upside for even more? He has never had close to the talent in Buffalo that he now has in Cleveland, and they may now sign Dez, who, by the way, we probably should have mentioned, Dez Bryant is visiting the Browns next week. That's a long story we're not going to get into, but yeah, Dez Bryant's going in for a visit with the Browns next week. That plus Todd Haley's pass-heavy play calling and his legs could propel him into the top 10 and maybe even sneak into the top 7 or 8. I think this is going too far in terms of like the potential for Tyrod Taylor, because we can't forget that Baker Mayfield was drafted number 1 overall. They obviously, when they trade away the first pick in the 3rd round, I feel like Tyrod is going to get his play. He's going to play for a while, but I think once they believe Baker's ready, they might make that change if they're out of the playoff hunt, or, if the team just doesn't perform like they need them to, or, maybe Hugh Jackson gets fired, a new head coach comes in, and they're starting fresh anyways, so let's just start the new quarterback. How do you feel about Tyrod Taylor in general? And I'm also going to bring up a strategy to ask you about this question as well. So, Greg, let's pretend that you're in a 1 quarterback league.
I have to.
All right. So, yeah, let's pretend that you draft Tyrod Taylor, okay? And you have a big enough bench where you're able to grab Jameis Winston. You start Tyrod Taylor for those first 3 games, and then you're gonna have Jameis Winston for the remainder of the season.
I like it. I have a few beefs with this question. Saying that Tyrod never had talent in Buffalo, that's kind of a knock on Sammy Watkins, LaShawn
Robert
McCoy,
Woods,
Chris Hogan, Robert Woods, Charles Clay. Like, come on, man, give those guys some credit. But really, you nailed it, man. If Baker Mayfield wasn't in the picture, I would be way more optimistic about Tyrod being a solid season-long play. Like, I like Tyrod Taylor. I think he's good. But history tells us that Mayfield is going to start games in year 1. Now, whether that happens in week 2, week 3, or week 10, we don't know. And that's what makes Tyrod into a pure streaming play to start the season. Like, he could be good in that capacity until Mayfield's ready to go, but you can't draft him expecting a full season. So with that in mind, I really like the pairing of him and Winston. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, it was kind of something that kind of came just naturally. We were having this conversation. I can't remember if it was in the podcast or Bobby and I were just talking. But in terms of Winston and what you can do to bridge the situation, and Tyrod Taylor, he's going to start for 3 games. That's going to happen. But Baker Mayfield, by the way, looked really good last night. And honestly, I wasn't shocked watching it. I know a lot of people were like, oh, Baker, he's not Johnny Manziel. No crap. I don't want to get into that conversation again, because anybody that thinks he's Johnny Manziel doesn't belong near a football, like a piece of paper writing about football. But he looked really good, and he looked comfortable. He played a little bit with the first team wide receivers, a little bit with the second team. Looked strong in his outing. So I was actually I walked away impressed with the Browns offense overall. It seems like maybe Hugh Jackson said, we're bringing in Todd Haley because, being a head coach, I didn't realize how much there was involved to it. And if that's what it takes for Hugh Jackson to be a better coach, more power to him. And I hope he turns it around, because it's been bad, really, really, really bad the last 2 years.
What percentage chance do you think Mayfield has of starting week 1? 5%?
I'd say
20%?
I'd say it's legitimately 0%. I think that Hugh Jackson, that's part of the reason I don't like Hugh Jackson. I don't think he's a very good coach. I think he's a better offensive coordinator than anything. But he already said basically he's not going to give Baker basically any QB1 reps because it's Tyrod's job. It's not. He legitimately said the words, "It's not a competition." That's a bunch of crap, okay? That's the reason that Russell Wilson started when he was a rookie is because he was the better football player. And I'm not saying that Baker would win the job over Tyrod, because I think Tyrod is a fine NFL quarterback. And Baker being a rookie coming in, it's definitely a curve. I'm not saying that he would win, but there should always be a competition, right?
I think it's a non-zero chance that Mayfield's in there week 1. Non-zero. I'm not saying it's a high percentage chance, but I think he has a shot. And we'll see what happens in the preseason. That's what's going to dictate it, I think.
Yeah, no, I love Baker. I think I've been on record saying that the Browns should have picked him number 1 overall. He was easily, by far, my number 1 quarterback prospect. So I mean,
all the metrics back it up. Yeah.
I love the player. But I've actually stuck to my guns in this one, saying that I think Tyrod Taylor starts till the bye week, which is they actually don't have a bye until it's week. There's going to be 10 games, so it's week 11 is their bye. And that time, I think we should find out what's going on with the team. There's a lot that can change with this Browns team. I'm sticking with that, but in the end, it's risky to draft Tyrod Taylor. I think that's where we're at. But guys, if Tyrod Taylor starts the entire year, I actually do believe that he could finish as a top 10 fantasy quarterback. Yes,
he's done it before.
Yep. With less talent, according to Jay. So Dan from Maryland asks a collusion question. Yes. By the way, guys, I love seeing different questions in the mailbag. Like, I go through them all and I sift through them, and all the keeper ones we can't talk about. But I love these ones because we get to talk about things that we would do in our own league. So Dan says that he's drafting at the 9th position in a 10-team league. The guy in the 10th position is a huge Patriots fan and will 100% draft Gronk with one of those first 2 picks. Knowing this, I was planning to confront him before the draft to see what he would be willing to give me for Gronk if I take him at 1-9. Ideally, I would tell him who to draft with his first overall pick, then target one of his later round picks after the draft. When I brought this up to the commish, he viewed it as collusion and strongly advised against it. Do you agree with him, or do you think I should be allowed to do this?
I don't think this is collusion. This is trade negotiation for picks. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. Like, first, it assumes that Dan has to draft Gronk at number 9 to make this work. And it's not like the 10th pick drafter is required to trade for Gronk. Like, he doesn't have to make a deal. Like, I mean, it's not like you're required to own Gronk if you're a huge Patriots fan. Like, furthermore, who's to say that Gronk won't get drafted higher by some other team who similarly wants that trade leverage over the 10th pick team? Like, I'm sorry, sorry, commish, but this is fine. Like, if they want to try to work out a trade ahead of the draft, like, they could have just done it after the draft, right? The guy takes Gronk at pick 9. The other guy takes some reasonably good player at pick 10. And, the number 9 drafter says, okay, I'll give you Gronk for your first pick and this guy from the later rounds. Like, what's the difference? I'm sorry, this is not collusion to me.
I agree. The only reason I could see why Dan would have to do it this way is if they don't allow trading of draft picks, because it's essentially trading draft picks. Like, you could say, hey, I'll give you my 9th pick for your 10th pick and your 6th round pick. And the guy would probably do it because he wants Gronk and wants to make sure that Dan's not going to take him. I mean, that's the only logical thing I could think. Be like, hey, Dan, tell your commissioner that you should allow trading of draft picks, and I'll just do it the right way. Otherwise, I would also say this is not collusion. This is strategy. So hopefully that helps you, Dan. Hopefully you can show that to your commissioner, and he listens. All right, Tim from Illinois. I actually handpicked this one because I felt like it was a good question for you. Tim from Illinois asks, how do you adjust for your league when there are like 10 quarterbacks off the board by the 5th round? I know that you guys always preach to wait at the quarterback position, but almost everyone in my league drafts 2 quarterbacks. At what point do I wait too long and get stuck with Case Keenum as my starter?
I mean, what's so bad about being stuck with Case Keenum?
I mean, I'd say it's not ideal.
I know it's not ideal. Okay, but let's break this down. Like, seriously, there's a lot to like from the quarterbacks who are available after the top 18 or the top 22, depending on what size of the league you're in. And we can run through it. Like, say you wait to draft your quarterback until literally every other team in your league has 2. So in a 10-team league, that means you're jumping in at QB 19, or in a 12-teamer, you're jumping in at QB 23. So here's the range of quarterbacks in terms of Fantasy Pros consensus ADP. Starting at QB 19, it's Derek Carr, Alex Smith, Eli Manning, Tyrod Taylor, Mitchell Trubisky, Baker Mayfield, Andy Dalton, Jameis Winston, Case Keenum, Blake Bortles. We've already talked about how Winston and Taylor and even Manning a little bit can have value. And Alex Smith was the fantasy QB2 last season before week 17, which is, when the fantasy season takes place. So if need be, you can very easily kind of Frankenstein a good quarterback together from this range of players if you're streaming. Or you can jump in and draft one just a little bit earlier, right? You don't have to wait until everyone has 2, but you could wait until some teams have 2 and still get somebody really good. Like, you're still getting good value there. You do not need to overreact and take one in the first 5 rounds just because your league mates are drinking the quarterback Kool-Aid. It's too deep a position. You don't have to do it.
You know what's funny is my home league used to do this, and then they finally wised up over the years, and they started drafting, quarterbacks a little bit later, and they started lasting into like the 4th and 5th round. But I know that these leagues exist, guys. I'm 100% out there, and like when you look at ADP, it kind of tells you that the leagues still do exist where quarterbacks are being taken in the 2nd and 3rd rounds. But like, Mike, well, what if Aaron Rodgers is there at the end of the 2nd? I'm like, no. I mean, guys, I love Aaron Rodgers. He's a great player, but I would not touch Aaron Rodgers before like middle to the late 4th round. Russell Wilson, 6th round territory. That's where I'm at on those guys. So if they're taking those quarterbacks, what it means is that you're getting a player in the 6th round that should have went in the 4th round. That's right. That's essentially what it means. And I promise you that if you wait and grab someone like Tyrod Taylor as your starting quarterback, you're going to be absolutely fine for at least those first couple weeks. And those backup quarterbacks that are on their benches, guess who's going to be dropped off their team?
That's right.
Those backup quarterbacks, and you're going to be able to stream quarterbacks. So I think Greg and I are in sync on this one. Just because your league just because they're going like hotcakes, let them do that. Because and even if they do hold on to those quarterbacks, trust me, someone is going to trade you one of those quarterbacks for like one of your backup running backs, and it's going to be glorious. You're going to get whatever quarterback you want because people don't realize running backs are hard to get.
Yeah, they're just spewing value when they're wasting that many picks on QBs because they don't need to. And you're going to reap the reward of that by getting better running backs, better wide receivers, better tight ends. It's simple stuff.
Yeah. All right. So breaking news on the show. We mentioned it at the start of the show, but it's a little more clear now. Kyle Shanahan has come out and said that Matt Breida and George Kittle both separated their shoulders, and we will not have either of them until at least week 1. So he's still saying that they should be back by week 1, but it just sounds, when you hear separated shoulder, it's like they're going to play in an NFL game in a month.
Especially not for running back, a guy who has to like lower his pads and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or tight ends too, all the blocking they do. That's not good for either guy. Bad news.
No, it's definitely not good. All right, Greg. So Bobby's been asking every analyst that we have on the show before we get out. We always ask if there's one player. Let's go a non-quarterback here because we've talked a lot about quarterbacks. One non-quarterback player that you want to walk away from in every one of your drafts.
Ah, man, that's a tough question. I mean, the easy answer is to say like one of the top picks, right? Like Le'Veon Bell or Todd Gurley. But let's not.
But who's realistic that maybe someone you would reach for? Like, let's say that they're an 8th round pick. You'll always take them in the 7 just to make sure that you have them.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, one of the guys who I've been really secretly excited about this year, and I find myself valuing him a little bit higher than most people, is Amari Cooper. And I see that target share getting way more inflated this year now that Michael Crabtree is gone. I was really out on the John Gruden thing at first, but now I'm starting to worry that maybe all this is just a smokescreen and that they are going to run like a real offense. Even if they don't, even if Gruden does take football back to 1997 or 1977 or wherever, like Cooper is clearly the best receiver on that team and Carr's healthy this year. We know he has the upside in him, like that crazy game he had against the Chiefs last year. He still gets to play 2 games against Kansas City this season. Like, there's something about Cooper. Like, I feel like this is the year he's finally going to pop and have that like T.Y. Hilton level year. I think it could happen. And I haven't been ending up with him as much as I want, but if there's one guy that I want to end up in all of my drafts with, who is reasonable, like who I might start reaching more for, I think Amari Cooper might be that guy.
We just became best friends. I don't know if Bobby, if you're listening to this podcast, you're fired. Because Greg, you just made my day, man. Like, I'm a huge Amari fan, and people have given me crap to the point where I say, you know what, he's a ship that I'm willing to go down with because I believe in the talent, and when talent meets opportunity, which he should have plenty of this year. I mean, John Gruden has talked him up, saying that he should have over 100 receptions. I'm not believing that, but I do believe. Here, by the way, here's a stat of the day for you guys. John Gruden, every year he's coached, he's had a 1,000-yard wide receiver on his team.
Gotta like that.
And if you think that Jordy Nelson's that guy, then draft Jordy Nelson. I'm not going to be that guy. And Martavis Bryant's been running with the second team offense, so it's not going to be him. But no, man, Greg, this was so much fun. Make sure you guys are listening. Make sure you guys follow Greg on Twitter at Greg Sauce and find his work at 2QBs.com. Is there anything big you got coming up that you wanted to promote?
So I'm right in the middle of a big podcast series for 2QBs.com. And just so your listeners aren't confused, you got to spell that out all with letters. There's no number in there, unfortunately. It's TWOQBS at 2QBs. And the podcast series I'm working on right now is called 2-A-Days. And each episode has 2 different analysts come on and record separately. So last night, you, Mike, and Bobby both recorded with me. And that episode is probably going to go up next week after people listen to this. So come check that out. But a bunch of really great analysts from around the industry. I'm just trying to piece together quarterback strategy, not just for 2 quarterback formats, but kind of across the board, like 1QB, 2QB, dynasty, best ball, redraft, DFS, from like all sorts of different personalities, so that you, the listener, can kind of get a really broad spectrum of analysis of the position. You can start to say, oh, like that makes sense to me, and oh no, that doesn't. And maybe you start to hear a couple different analysts put together like a lot of the same takes. Like a lot of people, spoiler alert, think that Deshaun Watson is overvalued this year. I'm just gonna that's happening. So sorry if you're a Deshaun Watson fan, but if you come listen to these shows, you're going to hear that a lot. But anyway, it's that sort of show where we're polling basically the whole industry for, all their quarterback takes on undervalued guys, overvalued guys, guys who are tough to evaluate. and then topics that are specific to each analyst's expertise. So when I talked to you and Bobby last night, we talked specifically about your work at Fantasy Pros and how rankings can be subjective, how they can be built in different ways, and what that means to us as players and us as rankers. So come check that out. Subscribe to the show on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, everywhere else you can find podcasts. It's the 2QB experience. And in this case, there is a number in there. So not to confuse you guys, but the 2QB experience, or just get on Twitter and look for the hashtag 2QBXP. I've been posting all sorts of stuff about the show and the series on there. Come check it out. I think you guys will like it.
Go ahead. Do it, guys. You already know that there's an episode with Bobby and I, so you guys have got to check it out.
No, hold on. Can I get one more plug in? I almost totally blew this. We also have a draft guide for 2 quarterback formats at 2QBs.com. This is an in-depth guide dedicated to the 2 quarterback and super flex formats. A bunch of great writers, a bunch of great analysis, rankings, cheat sheets, all that stuff specific to 2QB. So come check that out as well. Sorry for extending the plug, Mike. I had to do it though.
No, you're good.
Sal would have killed me if I didn't get a draft guide plug in.
No, you're all good with me, man. I was part of the mock draft in that. But guys, that's going to put a wrap on this episode. Man, it feels good to talk about some new info, even if it was, it was some bad news, but it's okay. We're getting new info, guys. Stay tuned to the show to find out what it means throughout the preseason, as we're doing 5 shows per week. This is the 5th one this week, if you guys have missed it. I'd like to thank the sponsors of today's show, pristineauction.com and NFL Game Pass. Bobby is supposed to rejoin me on Monday, so we'll have the gang back together again. Until then, lights out.
I just wanted you to watch me dissolve.